Hey, welcome to day 2 of Connect. Yes, you saw me yesterday in New York, and somehow I've already made it back over here to Redmond. I just couldn't wait to come rub a little bit more DevOps on it here with my friend Josh.
That's right, coast to coast DevOps.
Exactly, man, exactly. There's no wrong way to rub DevOps on stuff, so we're going to definitely be doing it today. So my name is Donovan Brown. I am a Principal DevOps Manager here at Microsoft. I now run a team that's been nicknamed the League, and what we do is we make sure that we can help you from any language and any platform be effective. And today we're going to be talking about how we can do that from a mobile perspective. And obviously to do that, I'm going to need my buddy here, Josh.
Yeah, so I'm Joshua Weber. I'm a program manager on the Visual Studio App Center team. And it's really exciting that I get to talk with Donovan. He always does the DevOps side of things. I really like the mobile side of it. And so it's nice when we get to combine together and actually show off kind of the features that we can do together using both of our products together.
Yeah, absolutely, and they're coming together in a way that they've never been before.
Yeah,
it's really nice to see that. So let's jump into the slides here and start working our way through that. So you know who we are, so we're going to skip the intro slides, but I want to get to the slide where we have to talk about the definition of DevOps. If you ever seen me speak before, you know what I'm about to say, but I want to make sure we level set for all those who have not. Depending on who you ask, you're going to get a different definition of DevOps, and it's really important that we level set first. So if you go to visualstudio.com whack DevOps, you're going to see the next definition on the slide. The definition reads, DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. And to me, the most important word there is value.
Yeah.
Right? You have to continuously deliver value. And it takes a lot of things coming together, the people, the process, and the products. And I think today we're really going to highlight how those products come together from all different aspects and areas of the Visual Studio Team Services team, from the App Center team, and how we're able to enable DevOps for any application. And not just the mobile front end. I think that's what's crucial today, is a lot of us are focusing on one piece of our solution or the other when you need to deploy the entire solution as a unit.
Yeah, and I mean, I steal this from you all the time as a stage, because I think it's exactly right for DevOps. I mean, it's not, I think people get a little too caught up in the products sometimes and like the stuff, but it's really that how do you deliver value? And if that's just process or that's people, that's interaction, it's across your entire like software development lifecycle. When it comes to mobile, that's not just like mobile or not just your back end, it's everything together. And I'm pretty excited for our session here. We got I think a nice little demo of showing how the server side and the mobile side can actually come together into one unified place.
Completely agree. And I think with some of the new announcements that we've made and the features that we're adding, we're able to do this demo like we've never been able to do it before. I used to always talk about, yes, I can do this demo, but it wasn't easy to build, right?
No,
I mean, you had to kind of be Donovan to build it, and he had to know the ins and outs, and now we're making it so easy. I used to have to jump from one build to another build because I couldn't build in one build definition, the mobile part and the backend part, and now I'm really excited to show what we've been able to do because we can do that. So now that we agree on what DevOps is, let's talk about why DevOps is important. So we know what it is, but why is it important? And I think one of the reasons it's important is on this next slide. We talk about the fact that every company is a software company. You could be GE, you could be Ford, you could be BMW. Doesn't matter what you actually give to your end users. At some point, software has affected that product. It could be your back office, it could be your inventory, and you have to make sure that you are able to not only keep up with your competition, but outpace your competition. And the way that you do that is making sure that your software enables you to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely true. Software, I mean, to quote, right, software is eating the world, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And if you're not able to really accelerate your software development cycle, you're not able to iterate rapidly, where you can close that feedback loop, where you get that feedback from your customers, understand what they need, be able to innovate, and then deliver that innovation to them as fast as possible, you'll simply get strove by your competition.
You know what's
You'll
interesting?
fall behind.
Yeah, what I think is also interesting is that the mobile world is the most fiercely competitive world there's ever been, because I remember I'm old enough to where I used to have to go to the store and buy a box of software and bring it home and like pump in CDs or pump in floppy disks for an hour to install it. But now on the mobile device, to get an alternative to you is just a click.
Yeah.
And you download it, and I have your competitor's product now on my machine, and I'm going to uninstall you, give you a 1-star rating, and I'll never be back again. So it's important that you're able to use your tools effectively to deploy that value. So every company is a software company, and I kind of just alluded to the second bullet that the competition is already doing this.
Yeah.
If you're the last person to do this, you're going to be the first person to be displaced by your competition. And you have to figure out a way, how do we increase our velocity? because we're expecting updates. This new generation of consumers are expecting updates regularly. And if you don't, they start to think that, well, they must not be investing in this anymore.
Exactly.
Let me go find someone who's actually cares about their product. And that's not necessarily true that they don't care, but they have to be able to continue to innovate. And what I've noticed is that historically, when you move faster, you incur more risk. And they're like, oh, well, we'll fail fast. That's no longer okay.
No.
You can't fail fast. You have to succeed fast, right? Because if you fail and you think, oh, I can roll out another update really quickly, by the time you do that, I've already installed your competitor's product on my phone.
It really comes down to its quality, right? Like your customers want that fast innovation, but they didn't give up their drive for quality. Like you need to be able to do that fast iteration while still maintaining quality and like the level of bar and professionalism that you need in your software. That's why I really like Agile DevOps. It helps you to go really fast where you might feel like you're a little bit out of control, but the process and the tools and stuff can help to keep you in a safe place without you kind of flying off the rails trying to do this really rapid pace.
Absolutely, because that's where we want to reduce the human error, right? I kind of showed this yesterday. If you haven't had a chance to see the keynote, I'd highly encourage you to do that because I give you a peek behind the scenes of how we actually implement DevOps here at Microsoft. We run over 64,000 unit tests against every single pull request. And we do that 600 times a day. So quality is of the utmost importance to us. You can't just run fast. You have to run fast effectively, and we actually do that. So one other thing before we get to the other slides I want to point out, we're going to keep an eye on our time here because we want to make sure that we keep time for questions, and make sure you start sending us in your questions. So go ahead and send us your questions. We're going to start our timer here so they can catch up with us. There you go, hint, hint. And so now that we have a counter counting down, we're going to answer your questions as soon as we get to that point. But I think we have one more slide we want to go through before we start showing you a tour. Now, I am horrible at architectural design, so forgive me for this horrible slide, but what this slide does do is show you all the technology that is going to be demonstrated to you here in just a moment. We are building an application that I've been demoing for years called People Tracker. And what I do is, as technologies change, as we get new technology inside of our organization, I start to embellish and grow up this particular story. It used to just be a ASP.NET application running inside of App Service. But now it is a mobile front end. It is a Docker-based website running inside of a Docker container. It has web services backed by app service. It then has a database in Azure. I mean, I was thinking, how can I build a demo app that actually exploits a lot of the real-world problems that our customers have?
It's great because it shows off a lot of those modern style app development architectures that are really being used, and that if you're not there yet, you can kind of aspire towards moving for maybe your next generation, your product.
Absolutely.
And so I really like this demo app quite a bit.
Thank you very much. And what I really liked about the demo as well is that it actually has a database backend, right? How many of us go out there and do this? We're going to show you DevOps and we only do the front end, or I'm going to show you DevOps and we only do a website. I'm like, what app worth its salt doesn't have a database backend? And we've just hand waved over the hard part, right? Like, oh yeah, you'll figure that out later. This actually has a database in it that actually has to get its schema changed, and I'll show you exactly how we're able to do that as part of our DevOps pipeline. So we're using SSDT, which is SQL Server Data Tools, as one technology. We're using Xamarin to actually build the front end. We're using VSTS to build, orchestrate, and deploy the entire process. So what I'm going to do now is we're just going to switch over to my machine, and I'm going to take you on a quick tour of the application. This is the homepage. You can actually go there. So if you're watching and you want to play along, you can actually go to peopletracker.us, and then you click on People here. And then if you do so, you can actually enter in your name or your buddy's name or whatever you want to do and actually start adding their names here. And what the process does, and I've done this live on stage, which is kind of neat, is that I go back through and I add a middle name column as part of the demo. And people are using the app, and I'm sitting here changing the database right from underneath them, and nothing ever breaks.
Changing the database, especially with because there's no middle name column in your database today, right?
Exactly.
So you're doing the full database migration.
Exactly.
On the fly.
And that's what's really important is that when you deploy your app, you're not deploying just one piece, you're deploying a solution, right? And your solution is made up of front end, middle tier, databases, Redis caches, whatever it is, and you don't want your pipeline to be, oh, I'm going to rub DevOps just on the front part.
That's right.
And then manually go do my database, or I'm going to go manually go do this other part, because that becomes the bottleneck. That becomes the high risk portion of your pipeline, is the part that you're doing manually. And remember, that slide said we have to increase our velocity and reduce our human error. You don't do that by doing parts manually. You want to automate everything. And another thing that we highlighted yesterday, which was kind of neat, is we do safe deployment here at Microsoft. And we've even automated that. Because safe deployment relies on a human being monitoring telemetry, making sure that there's no alerts that need to be caught, and then if everything is good, going forward. And now we've even automated that, where release management will monitor your telemetry for you and make sure. So we are reducing human error.
Yeah.
Basically, I always joke, you never, ever, ever send a human being to do a machine's job.
That's right.
Let the machines do it.
Automation's a wonderful thing, right?
It is.
It allows you to be repeatable. It lets you be without error, and lets you actually measure, log it, and keep track of it.
Right. Automation is what lets us go fast safely, right? Because a machine will happily do the same thing over and over again without ever making a mistake. So this is the application that we're dealing with. Again, it's a very simple application, and there you go. Everyone who just played along is now famous, because whenever you go on demand, you're going to see your name in this
That's awesome.
list.
Is that people from watching this session right now?
Exactly.
That's fantastic.
Exactly. So what we're going to do now is just talk through the pipeline of how this actually goes ahead and works. So one of the new features that we have is a phased build. And when you first thought about this, like, this is ridiculous. Why do I need phased builds? I'm just going to put all my tasks end to end. I don't need different phases. But let's talk about mobile. Mobile is very unique, because if you want to build an iOS application, that must be built on a Mac.
Has to be
Period.
built on a Mac.
Right? There's legal ramifications, but even if we can technically figure it out, Apple won't let us do that. Correct. You have to build it on the Mac. But my SSDT project, where I'm doing my database, that's Windows and Windows specific. Now, if you're doing containers, chances are you're running them inside of Linux. And the best way to build your Linux containers is on a Linux machine. Historically, when I used to do this demo, I wrote my own task that would let me call one build from another build. So what would happen is I would run my Windows part, I'd have a task at the bottom that said, go call the other part, and then it would go build the mobile part.
Pretty clever, but
it was clever, but it was
ideal.
clunky. Yeah, it was clunky because I now had two different build summaries to watch, right? I had the build summary of my first build, I had the build summary of my second build. I then had to take the artifacts from two different builds and combine them back in my release, and it just wasn't, like you said, it was a necessary evil, but it really wasn't as sexy as I wanted it to be. And that's why I'm so excited to show you what I have on my screen now. So what we are able to do inside of a build, now this is not release, this is build, is actually define different phases of my build. So for example, if I were to click on here where it says mobile, you'll see that I've actually chosen a Mac pool. And I could have actually chosen our new hosted Mac pool, which is incredible. Exciting, right? Yeah, that's a huge announcement, right? So obviously I could not share this before it was public, so I built this entire demo against my own personal Mac. So even though we're giving you a hosted Mac pool, you don't have to use our Macs. If you want to use your own Macs for whatever reason, you're still able to register our agent from Windows, Mac, or Linux, put it inside of VSTS, and deploy anywhere in the world. You can deploy on-prem, you can deploy in the cloud, and you can use your own Mac, because sometimes you might still need to use, I don't know, an older version of Xcode or an older version of the Xamarin framework for whatever reason. And we're going to keep upgrading it and keeping our agents fresh. And if you need that kind of like that target, the stationary target, you can actually still use your own Macs. But I wanted to point out the fact that we now finally have all three platforms hosted.
This is pretty exciting. I would say that I've heard from a lot of customers who have been early adopters on this, that they're very excited to not have to do the management. They basically usually keep something like a Mac Mini inside of a data center, and they run the STS agent on it, but then they need to, every time they need to do a tool change, they have to go to that Mac Mini and update it. And if they want more than a couple of concurrent builds, that means a couple of machines. And that all just goes away, right? Like the cloud will take care of that. The agent pool in the background will be updated. You'll have your selection of tool chain, and it's just all provided for you without any of that kind of maintenance headache that you usually have.
Yeah, because I have a Mac Mini, and the only thing mini about it is the performance. It's like a nightmare, right? Like everything I do is painfully slow, so I hate having to touch it, so this is going to be fantastic. So just wanted to point out that you can do that. But what's interesting is this is just one phase of my build. This phase is doing my Xamarin application for iOS and Android on a Mac. But if I scroll down, you'll notice that there's a web part. This is using a completely different agent pool. So it's still one build that's able to say this portion of the build needs to be built on a Mac, this portion of the build needs to be built on Windows. This is my ASP.NET middle tier, so these are just web services. And it's also where my database project lives. So this is where it knows the schema of my database and what changes need to be applied during my release. Scroll down even further, because I'm using Docker, I clearly want this stuff built on Linux. And I happen to be using our hosted Linux pool for this. The reason I like using our hosted Linux pool is all the Docker tools are already on that particular agent. So you don't have to worry about having an external agent that has Docker tools to build your Docker images. Just use ours. We're going to be able to download whatever your base images is, use your Docker file, and literally build your images right here on our agent. And then we basically publish those. And I'm publishing mine to Azure Container Registry, obviously. People are like, well, why do I need Azure Container Registry if I already have Docker Hub? Well, because if your hosts are going to be living inside of Azure, it only makes sense that your images live inside of Azure because they're going to be networked close to each other. So downloading an image, no matter what the size of it, it's going to be much faster than pulling it from an external network like Docker Hub or things like that. And look at this, one build definition, which means when I'm done, I get one build summary that has all of my test results in it from both my, so where I can run unit tests in all 3 phases, and when I come and I actually look at that, you're going to be able to see all that information in one build summary, which is fantastic. All my artifacts are now in one build summary. I can go back in and click through. So I have 2 tests here. One of these tests are running on one phase, the other tests are running in a different phase, but I don't have to then figure out how to combine all that information together. And if I go to my artifacts here, I have my drop for my mobile side and I have the drop for my Windows side, all as one artifact, which is fantastic. So multi-phase builds, much cooler than I thought initially, right?
No, I was actually blown away the first time I saw your setup here and stuff like that. I was just wildly impressed. Like,
cool.
Being able to see, you know, we all have realistic like multi-tier architectures. They're on different tech stacks. They're not the same. But being able to have one DevOps process that reaches out to all of them, where it's not just DevOps for each of them independently, but we can actually pull together in that hub experience where you just have like the one summary result. The triggering happens together, no more of this. Am I on the in-staging environment? Did that deploy at the same time as my mobile update that points to it? Did my web tier get updated at the same time? The fact that you can actually pull all this stuff together was like, it really blew me away that you put everything together and like how clean and like simple it looked when you actually get the results instead of this like links to everywhere and a OneNote page that explains how to actually diagnose this stuff. It's just like all there, right there in VSTS for you. So
yeah, because otherwise we would have 3 different builds. We'd have to orchestrate that information ourselves. So that starts to become manual process. Like someone's going to have to say, okay, I have 3 builds. Now I want to do a release. Which version of each build do I actually need to stitch together to produce the final product? But now it's like, no, just build it. Everything's going to build. Everything's going to version together as a unit. And now we're going to be able to leverage that inside of our release. So we would jump from our continuous integration, obviously, over to our continuous deployment. And what I like about this is that we have dev, QA, and prod. And until recently, when I did this demo, another reason that it was kind of difficult for me is because I was using Visual Studio Team Services, I was using Hockey App, and I was using Xamarin Test Cloud. 3 different UIs, 3 different interfaces, 3 different products, essentially. Right. And you could get it to work. And when you were done, it was really, really impressive. You were also very tired once you finally figured out all the different things to make it work. And that's why I'm so excited about the maturity of App Center. Right, so App Center is allowing me to take what used to be 3 products that I had to work with and kind of combining it down to where it's just VSTS and App Center. And as you'll show us later, sometimes it can be just App Center, depending on the type of app. So let's drill in a little bit and look at how I made up each of these different environments. And as you'll notice, here we are. It's one phase for this because everything can actually be done off of one machine. The phase concept also exists here in release. So if I wanted to have multiple phases running off of different agents, if I needed that, I could actually do that. I'm a big fan of infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code is the practice where we codify the infrastructure upon which we want to run our application. We do not want someone to have to go into a portal of any sort and click around to configure our infrastructure. Because if we do that, that information is only in that person's head. That becomes a risk for us, because if they go on vacation or they get the hit by the proverbial bus, right? Then we're like, oh my God, what do we do? You codify that information, and then you give that information to this task. It will literally go to Azure and say, I need you to make sure this exists. If it does, it's a no-op, we're done, let's keep moving. If anything is out of whack, I'm going to go back in there and I'm going to fix it for you automatically, and then you can proceed to do your deployment.
I've always really liked this too, because ultimately, I was a developer first. I'm still kind of a developer
Absolutely.
first. And so the infrastructure as a code really, it lets you treat your source code as the source of truth. No longer do you have to worry about, this is the source code for the app, but I don't know how it's going to behave because I didn't define the tooling or the chain or the infrastructure of where it's running. That's taken care of somewhere else, or maybe even some other person, kind of before the DevOps movement. And so the infrastructure as code, I think, really gets back to the source code is what you care about. Yep. Just check out your repo, it'll run. It helps you actually be able to reproduce this when you take a new employee and they actually download and run it locally. Everything is defined, the tools, the chain, the infrastructure, all right there in your repository.
And what I also love about this is that using infrastructure as code in the way that we have here, it actually is a cost savings.
Yeah.
Think about it. I could literally delete everything in my development resource. I could delete everything in my QA resource. Stop paying for these environments that I don't need all the time. And then simply run my release again, and dev will be spun back up and deployed and used. QA will be spun back up and deployed and used. And then when we're done with it, we can literally automate. In my QA stage, I could literally say, let's go ahead and delete dev, I don't need it anymore. And as I deploy to production, say, let's go ahead and delete QA, I don't need it anymore. And then only keep production around forever, and then you can use it for cost savings, disaster recovery. There's like no shortage of benefits of using infrastructure as code.
It's a fantastic solution.
It is. That technology is fantastic. Yeah. Now, this is what a lot of us hand wave over. And I don't know why, because it's not that difficult. If you use tools like SSDT, and we have a great partnership with Redgate. They have an offering that they call ReadyRoll. That is an extension that you can install from the marketplace that allows you to treat your database. Like you just said, I love the way that you said that. Your source control becomes truth. This is where everything lives. And a lot of us can't say that about our database, right? The schema of the database, the shape of our database is not in source control. It's literally in the database, right? If that database gets corrupted, that's it, right? I remember I used to challenge customers, like, show me your code from a year ago. That's easy. They'd go into source control. They'd say, what was the code a year ago? I'm like, great. Show me the database that matches that. They're like, do we have a backup from a year ago? Because that's the only way that they could version it. And now with tools like SSDT or ReadyRoll from Redgate, you can now treat your database just like you treat your infrastructure, just like you treat your source code. It's all in source, which is fantastic. And then again, we produce a DAC pack file, and literally that file plus a connection string equals my database deployment. It figures out at runtime all of the schema changes so that you never have to write SQL again to actually update your database.
It's incredible.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, I go into SSMS, I use a GUI to do all of my database changes, I schema compare to my project, and then everything just magically works for me. So I've been a huge fan of SSDT. It's Microsoft's best kept secret.
Yeah,
it's been there since 2008. We tell nobody about this. Why? I have no idea. But we never tell people that it's there. I'm finally beating this drum as loud as I can. Very quickly, we go back in and we deploy our web service in these last 4 tasks here. Why does it take 4 tasks? Because I'm using something called deployment slots, which I love to death. If you've ever used ASP.NET, you know that when you're deploying your application, you have to first take it offline. Because while you're copying files, you don't want people accessing your website. That's a bad thing in our world. If I can't access your website, I'm going to someone else's website. You can't imagine Walmart being down while they update their site. Well, I'm going to Target, right?
It's been a while since I've seen a maintenance window.
Exactly.
Scheduled maintenance window.
Exactly. There's technology like this that enables that, where we have a slot behind our production site that I can deploy to in my leisure. I can even address that site to make sure that everything works. Because when you take an app offline to deploy to it, it's offline for you and your customers. Sure. Not even you can verify if it worked until you put it online and you fingers crossed that it worked. When you use deployment slots, you can actually deploy to a slot that is live, but only visible to you. You can make sure that everything works, run smoke tests there, make sure everything works like you want it to, and then, and only then, swap them, such that your customers see zero downtime. You're able to verify that the code is in good shape before we actually do the deployment, which is fantastic. And then we're doing a quick Docker. I'm not using Kubernetes. I actually have a session later today where you actually will see us using Kubernetes here instead. This is just me with my old stood up Docker host, and I want to stop my old image, start my new image, and then I want to go ahead and run some Selenium test against the Docker website that's hitting my backend, that's then hitting my database to verify, is my backend okay before I start testing my front end. And this is where you were able to help me, because in the past, I used to use, like I said, Hockey App and Xamarin Test Cloud, and you were saying, Donovan, you don't have to do that anymore. You can actually use the power of App Center. So talk to me about these 3 bottom tasks down here that you swapped out.
Yeah, so a lot of the products that we had before that enabled this scenario, like Test Cloud and Hockey App, were individual products, which was okay. They worked really great, but they targeted kind of a narrow scenario. And App Center, which we've announced, I think, yesterday.
Yes, we did.
Ties a lot of those products together. So you now have one set of UI that accesses all that. You can get back in here with one set of tasks. So you can see in Donovan's setup here, he has basically a task to do the Xamarin UI testing. So that runs on the App Center test suite. So in this case, it's the Android application gets built.
Yep.
The tests get built as well, and then they get deployed and they run on actual hardware that exists inside of our lab. And like I said, we leverage the fact that we already have a lot of experience here with the Xamarin Test Cloud product. And so we leverage all of that learning that we have from Xamarin Test Cloud in the App Center product to really achieve this diverse, large set of device testing, where your test runs on real hardware in basically real time to detect issues that come up. And for sure, in the mobile world, you're going to get issues on specific hardware devices that's just really impossible to detect with a simulator build.
Yep.
And so really running on actual hardware is critical.
And then these other two tasks here are where I used to use Hockey App to do the distribution of my app to my beta testers. But it looks like what's really cool about this, instead of me having to use two different products, I can now just use what used to be called Mobile Center, as we can still see from the task, but now it's called App Center to do both my testing and my distribution.
That name should get updated pretty shortly here.
Very cool, yeah. We just announced it yesterday. I mean,
That's right.
we'll get that fixed for you. And now what ends up happening, this is what I call my dev release. Now if you'll notice, I also have a QA release. And what's different here is that at the bottom, we're actually using TestFlight and Google's beta as additional vehicles to then deploy our code to more testers. And then we rinse and repeat one final time. I've met a lot of people who do mobile development that say, Donovan, this is all great. This is kind of what we do today. But the final step for them is still manual, right? What they do is that the end result is they go and download an APK or an IPA from somewhere, and some human being then manually uploads it to the actual app store. I said, well, has it ever failed before? It's like, of course it's failed before, because someone grabbed the wrong IPA or IPA or APK file, or we emailed the wrong one to the wrong person and they uploaded the wrong file. And that's why, if you look at our production one, we're actually using tasks that deploy directly to the stores that are necessary. There are no human beings that have to touch any of our files to get them from development all the way into the actual app stores themselves. Now, I noticed that we're not using App Center tasks for that. Why did we choose just to use these tasks instead?
I chose when I set up this part just to show the kind of diversity of doing the tasks where you want. One of the nice things I think that VSTS provides is this ability to do gating. And so I actually really liked how you had set this up with the phases. So this is a pretty popular concept inside of Microsoft. We usually call these rings.
Right.
I don't know if that's as common outside of Microsoft, but for us across all the teams, we always have this idea of rings, where you start out with a very small set of users, usually the dev team themselves, and you try to develop your application just to that group, and they do it, and you get some early feedback, some early validation of problems, and then you can slowly, progressively release to a larger and larger ring of people.
We call that safe deployment.
That's exactly what Donovan has set up here, where your dev build can go right out to your development team. You don't want any delay whatsoever.
Correct.
If you're going to break, you want to break as fast as possible on actual devices. And so you deploy out to App Center to really get that no delay, less than a second, immediately available, an immediate in-app update, and then your developers are on the piece as much as you want. But when you're going external with something like TestFlight, you probably want to have it a little bit more controlled. You don't want to just maybe automate the trigger on every CI commit.
Sure.
And so you can take advantage of the VSTS process to a little bit control that, so that you can have some manual gates whereby you can actually go in, see the results of a specific ring, and then decide that this is good quality and I want to push out to the next stage of that ring.
Yeah.
And App Center plays in here by trying to really make it easy so that no matter where you are in those ring stages, whether you're deploying to just your developers or you're doing some sort of a deployment out to even production through the stores, anywhere along that scale, you can still automate it and set a process in place so that you can simply trigger these actions instead of having them be, well, there's a process that this person has to do by an email, and then they have to navigate to a shared folder and make sure they pick the right version and pick this stuff. So by being able to add some process and a little bit of rigidity there, you can actually get some safety in place so that you can have a nicely solid, repeatable, nobody has to look it up. You don't have to worry about someone going on vacation who usually does your release.
Yep.
And so somebody else has to be cross-trained. So you can just kind of have everything automated where it's just simple clicks to trigger from one stage to another. Even all the way out to production, all the way from development, no matter what kind of environment you're doing for your deployments.
Yeah, and what I want to highlight there is you mentioned a couple of things, because I always make the statement, never send a human being to do a machine's job. But we do want human beings involved in the deployment, but we don't want them doing the deployment. So how do we kind of...
It's in your DevOps statement, right?
Exactly.
It's process people.
Exactly.
Tools, right?
Exactly. So what I wanted to highlight here is the fact that if I click on one of these environments, I'm able to create what we call approvers. And these are individuals or groups that I want to at least give us a thumbs up. Hey, everything looks good. Please automate the deployment to the next environment. I'm not going to touch any of the files, but I have gone and reviewed the output. I've reviewed the test coverage. I've reviewed it in development. I think the app looks good. So I would like to then have an approver here that gets a notification and then gets told, or gets the ability to say either approve or reject this release. But again, they don't touch the files, which is crucial. Another thing we announced yesterday was this new feature here where we actually have gates that you can define. These gates can use things like Azure Monitor. They can have, you can call an arbitrary Azure function that you've written. You can have it run queries against a work item and see, has there been any issues filed since we started deploying this? Because if so, that's probably a bad thing and we don't want to let this go out. So in addition to having approvals from human beings, we can actually have release management automatically monitor application insights for alerts or CPU spikes or memory spikes and say, oh, this code's not working the way that we think it should, and I'm going to protect you from making a mistake by automatically deploying this. So again, we're automating as much of the process as we can, but I like the fact that you were talking about all the safety that we provide, and we can provide that still in an automated fashion, right, where it's not a lot of human intervention, but humans can actually participate in the process, which is really, really cool. So what we've shown you here really quickly is how we're able to take change and run it through the entire process using a lot of cool new features that we talked about. And what we're going to do for a moment is we're going to jump back into slides and we're going to reiterate some of the points that we've talked about, and then we're going to have Josh show us a nice overview of what we can do inside of App Center. So on the next slide here, again, we're going to talk about some of these concepts. Continuous integration, we kind of talked about that, assuming that you know what it means. And what that really means is that upon every commit, we want you to go back in and download, or we don't want you, we want a machine to go back in and download the latest version of your code, compile it, test it, and package it. And I want you to do this if you don't already have this. Don't go try to convince your manager, don't try to tell the other guys on your team, just go set it up, because it doesn't affect anyone if you go set this up except you. And what I mean by that is you are the one that knows that the code is broken when your buddy checks in the code and it's broken the build. If you've ever been on a team that doesn't have CI, you've been the person who did a get latest, and now you're upset with your buddy because they broke the build, and you're just sitting there waiting for them to fix the build. Had you had CI in place, as soon as they made that commit, it would have tried to download the build, it would have failed to build it, and then we would have been able to say, hey, don't do a get latest, guys, because if you do, you're going to have to stop working. And then people are going to wonder, like, why is Josh still able to work and the rest of us are broken? Because Josh looked at the CI that he had set up, and that's why it didn't affect anyone else on the team. So you don't have to go ask permission to set up continuous integration. It takes a few minutes, just go do it, and you're going to instantly get value from it as well.
Yeah, my take has always been, I've been doing the kind of DevOps and the Agile thing for a little while, and people will often ask, where do you start? It's CI. Like, you should start with CI. If you don't have CI, build CI. Like, you need to do it. It's the quickest way to get the most value.
There's no downside to it, right? Continuous integration is instant value for you. And it's funny, the only place that you would have to start before that is if you don't have source control.
That's right.
Right, and hope there's still a few. There's still a few, believe it or not. Yeah,
true,
there's still a few, but as soon as you have source control, you got to get continuous integration. So let's make sure we're switching over to our slides, because it still looks like they're showing my machine instead of the slide machine. Perfect. So we have just basically talked about continuous integration. We showed you some of this in action, and one thing that we didn't highlight very well when I was showing you is that all of our tools integrate automatically. So you can create a branch from our Kanban board. You can actually commit to that particular branch. That branch will trigger CI builds, the CI's releases, and all that information automatically gets associated together, giving you amazing traceability by simply creating a branch. Right? It's unparalleled when you use all of what we have here at Visual Studio Team Services to do your builds for you. And then on the next slide, we want to talk about the test cloud. And this is, again, I got to see this. I actually went to Denmark, and I actually saw our actual test
I'm
cloud.
jealous.
Yeah, it was pretty cool, yeah.
I'm on the team, I haven't seen it yet.
You think that's bad? I was really nervous because I had to do a mobile center talk in front of the team that actually creates the cloud, right, and demo their own product to them. So it went over really well. I was really happy, and then they rewarded me by letting me see the actual test cloud.
Very cool.
So it was pretty cool. So this is where we actually have physical devices, literally thousands of them. So you would never be able to collect, nor should you even try to collect all these devices yourself. Because even if you had them, you'd be manually testing on them, right?
It would take forever to try to manage this many devices.
Unbelievable, unbelievable. And now you have infinite access to them because we provide them for you in the cloud. So when you're doing tests, and I love the way that you said that, these are not simulators, these are not emulators, these are physical devices, and I've seen them. I walked into the room, and it's interesting because all the screens were black, but they were all on, and then all of a sudden one of them lit up, because someone had requested to run a test on that specific hardware. We saw the app get installed, the test ran, and then the phone went off again, which is really, really cool. So talk to us about all the different varieties of devices we have.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have about 1,000 devices, which I think results in slightly over 3,000 different configurations where we keep the devices on older versions of operating systems with older set, so you can go back in history to really target those users that aren't updating or aren't keeping up. There's great integration with VSTS or TFS, like we showed off with the tasks. And I can't estimate how much value you get from that testing, where you can see which device it failed on.
Yes.
And I'll do a little bit more demo later on here where we'll show off some of the stuff, but it's really powerful to be able to do that real world testing on a real world device.
Absolutely.
Without having to pay for the exorbitant cost of having thousands of devices floating around inside your own private lab.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's keep going through the slides because I actually want to see that. The other thing is about delivery, which is really important, especially when it talks about mobile, right? Deploying a website, delivering that is easy. You deploy it to the web server and you're done. But when you're dealing with mobile, it's getting that application to each individual person's device itself. And that's why we acquired Hockey App, right? Because they had the technology to do that in such a way that you didn't have to tether your phone to a PC or to a Mac to actually get your app onto that device. You would download it just like you would over the cloud. And not only that, the next slide I think shows the app in action where you can actually see the notification that you get saying, hey, there's a new version, why don't you go download that version onto your phone? So how did we incorporate that inside of the App Center stuff as well?
So this is something I always really got excited about. It's interesting because we always talk about continuous integration in the web product days. It's just kind of assumed that the deployment happens because it's so easy to push out to a web server. It's just an FTP file copy or like an Azure website deployment. But for the mobile world, that's really hard. That last mile where you actually have an IPA produced out of your build server and then getting it onto a device, you start to think like, what do? Do I just USB connect to the build server, or do I have to email it somewhere, or do I put it on a share? And Hockey App and now Visual Studio App Center, which builds upon all that Hockey App technology, really makes this just trivially easy. So you can see that I have just basically an app here. I go to the install website and I see it, not just the latest version, but all the versions that have come out. So if I want to roll back to something, maybe my QA testers report that there's a problem in production, I'm on the latest dev build, I just click back a couple of versions, install the latest. It's just one click, it overwrites onto my personal device. I don't have to worry about enrolling it or anything like that. No matter where it is, it's super easy. If I'm out at the bar hanging out with Donovan, he wants to know what I'm working on, I just add his name and he installs the app right there. It takes just seconds to install.
That's awesome.
And so being able to keep up to date is really powerful. And it extends that, I would say, that slight easiness of deployment from the web world and makes it just as easy and repeatable in the mobile world.
Absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, we do see your questions coming in. We're going to get to them. We want to get through the slides, have Josh do his demo, and I have answers for the questions that are coming in. Release management, this is my favorite feature.
I love release management.
Oh man, this release management I think is what made me famous, right? I mean, I literally attached myself to the product after we acquired InCycle, in release from InCycle, and it literally has catapulted me to this because it was the missing piece from TFS, right? TFS needed a release management feature to actually give us that full DevOps, and this is what we were missing, and I'm such a big fan. So this is where you saw us taking the DACPAC file, the infrastructure as code, the APKs and the IPAs and all that power, and actually deploying it and distributing it to all of the endpoints necessary for us to deploy our solution. So again, CI is about producing the artifacts. Release management is where we finally get to deploy those artifacts to the endpoints. And it gives you really great traceability and visibility.
Yep. And I love how it pulls that people and process together.
Yep.
So I mean, most people hate process. They usually it's like a dirty word. They're like, oh, process, that's just one thing that's going to slow me down.
Sure.
But when you talk about this release management, it's not about slowing you down. It's basically about automating and allowing you to have those gates or that influence, those manual triggers, so that you don't have to do the repetitive work to do it. You can just go in and see all the data that you need to do and then manually push through.
Absolutely.
So I really like it. It feels like the best place where you see those people and process come together.
I think it's
to be even faster than
that's a very good point, because CI, you just commit, but in release management, there is kind of this back and forth between the products and the people as we wait for manual approvals and we get the information back together. That's a really good way of putting that. And then obviously, remember the definition of DevOps, we said value is the key word. You can't assume that you delivered value. You have to measure what you deliver and prove that you delivered value. Because if you didn't, you're probably not working on the right thing. Your product backlog is probably not in the right order, right? It's really important to be able to monitor and prove that you delivered value. And monitoring goes even beyond custom telemetry on are people using that feature, but how healthy is our application, right? Are we getting server errors? Is the application crashing? And it's all this amazing data that we now have access to that enables us to prove that yes, we did or did not deliver value, and we might need to go focus or look somewhere else in our pipeline and in our development.
So I like to call this continuous monitoring,
Sure.
which is that next step. So once you do the continuous integration or continuous delivery, getting it out onto a device, you need to know what that experience is for customers when it's on their device. And the App Center really provides two primary solutions there. One is crash and analytics. For crash, I would say you need to track crashes. There's like nothing is worse in a mobile world than an app crashing. There is nothing that will destroy your App Store rating on the public stores other than crashing. It's just overwhelmingly obvious that if your app crashes, your users will be amazingly upset. It doesn't matter how great your stuff is.
And they're relentless.
So you need to capture every crash. You need to investigate the crashes. You need to stay on top of it. And you need to have a solution like App Center that captures every single crash, symbol locates those crashes back to the stack traces to make them readable so that you can go in, do the investigation, get those insights in order to fix those as fast as possible.
And I love the fact that it integrates with VSTS such that those crashes can immediately turn into bugs.
Correct.
Right, so that your developers can't pretend that they don't remember, they didn't
right.
know about it. Oh, you knew about it, because when you came into work the next day, you had 19 bugs assigned to you because that's what the app was doing last night. So yeah, the integration between VSTS and App Center has been just fantastic.
And analytics is really great. It's really hard. I mean, we are PMs, so we live this pain of trying to understand what does a customer actually want all the time. And the only way to really answer that question is to mix some qualitative interactions where you talk to customers and really understand them with some quantitative data as to what they really do. And the analytics really provides you that quantitative piece where you can see, did they really execute this app? How frequently did they run it? Where were they? What kind of devices were they using? You can use custom event tracking to get down to every type of behavior that they're taking. And this is definitely a little bit of an art to it, to understand what do you need to track, and then how do you extract insights from that. But App Center provides you just a powerful set of tooling where it's so easy to collect those events, and then with basic visualizations, or even exporting to something like Azure Blob or Application Insights, where you can really start to do some of that more powerful Azure big data analysis, where you can try to extract some of those key insights from your quantitative data from
And I like the fact that it integrates with Application Insights, because now it can start to correlate that information with other aspects of my application. And also, when people always ask me, so what should we track? It all depends on what answer you're trying to get. What's the question? Don't just go and put telemetry everywhere, because you're going to have so much you're not going to make sense of it. Figure out what it is you're trying to figure out, go put in the appropriate telemetry, and let us surface it for you here.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think the hardest part is deciding what question you want to answer.
Exactly.
Once you know the question that you want to answer, it's usually pretty straightforward to get the data that you need.
Exactly. Very cool. So let's see this stuff in action, and then we'll have a few minutes. So Anthony, Brian, and John, don't worry. I see your questions, and we're going to be answering them as soon as Josh blows our mind with our new announcement from App Center.
So I'm going to swap over to the App Center product. We did set this up with People Tracker, but I'm actually going to use a different app because People Tracker only has like 2 recent users and about 2 days of data. So the data is not as exciting as some of this longer. Cool. So we have something that looks like a little bit more production data to show off something. So I'm going to swap to the Smart Hotel app here. And the first thing I wanted to do was really talk about that test service, which is pretty exciting. I actually really like it. You can see that we have a test, and it really shows off the critical part of this, where you can see this booking test. It captures a screenshot, not just of your application at a certain point, but for every step in your test. And so you can see that we're going along the UI steps, and you can get to the step, and you see that in this case, just on the iPhone 6s, we have a failure. And so we go back to that slide that we showed earlier, which was the Android ecosystem fragmentation, and everyone talks about Android, but this page alone just actually shows that it's actually pretty fragmented in the Apple world as well.
For sure.
For all the devices that have been coming out, the different screen sizes, the resolutions. And so being able to do that wide range of testing where you can immediately pick up before your customers experience this, especially on some of those rarer cases where you might just have a small set of customers that don't get listened to quite as frequently, can be really critical.
What I liked about this as well, about the screenshots, is I remember I had a customer say, well, we have a really graphic intensive app, and I want to make sure it's pixel perfect. Can I use the Xamarin Test Cloud? I was like, absolutely, because we actually zoomed in, and you can keep zooming in, and you could literally get to the point where it was huge. It's like, dude, you can see every pixel that was rendered and see if it was right or not. So yeah, these are not just some type of weird screen captures. These are actually the screens that were rendered on the devices, and it's amazing how well we can zoom in on them.
And so moving on to the kind of distribution features, you can see that it's very easy to set up users. Inviting new users is as easy as just clicking on a group and adding a username to an email address. We also have the ability to do things like public distribution groups,
cool.
which is really great, where if you don't care so much about the security or restricting your access, you can actually make the experience really easy for people to install, where all they need to do is just go to a URL, and there's no login, there's no anything like that. It's just basically URL, immediately shows them the install button, they click the install button, they immediately have your app.
Awesome.
So it's a really great experience for that ease of access to your applications.
Got it.
The other thing that I wanted to show off was really our commitment to the whole lifecycle of deployments.
Okay.
And so not only for internal distributions where we do like a line of business app being deployed to your company, or maybe just an app going out to your development team or your stakeholders before it's released, but we also really support the integration to the public stores.
Got it.
And so I don't see us as really competing with the stores. I just
Sure.
see this as a partnership, right? There are clear scenarios where you want to be in the public production stores. There are clear scenarios where you want to use the beta stores, which is Test Flight and Google Play Beta and Alpha channels,
Sure.
or the Windows store flighting techniques. There are very clear scenarios where that is the best experience for your users, and so you should use that. And App Center allows us to mix those environments together,
Okay.
so that you can still automate. You can still have one set of process, one continual tool that controls your releases, but it also goes out to those external destinations.
What if I had an internal destination like Intune?
Yeah, so I guess that's also there as well, which is
Cool.
just like the public stores, Apple, Windows, and Google. We also support the Microsoft Intune. So if you have a line of business app being deployed, you want to go out to the Intune company portal private store, we definitely support that as well for pushing out. And now we're going to jump over here to some of that continuous monitoring feature set that I was talking about. And so I really find this a good example of why you get the power of one tool when we did this example. And so here we can actually do crash-free users, which is really how you want to look at your crash data. If you have a lot of crashes, but they only happen from just like one or two people, it might be okay, and that's not as critical.
That's horrible
because
thing
it's only maybe one or two. Maybe that's a little bit lower priority, as opposed to one or two crashes that's affecting half of your user base.
Understood.
Which is something that you probably need to wake people up on
Gotcha.
and get them on top of that as soon as possible. And so the ability that we do analytics tracking, where we have that user tracking and also the crash tracking, lets us mix and match this so that we can see that cross between that data, which just gives us more data to make a better insight and to understand where we're investing in. And so if we come in here, we can actually see the different crashes. These are heuristically grouped together based upon that technology that we got from Hockey App with the acquisition, to basically say that this crash was the same crash that happened on different devices. If we drill into one of these, you can see that it comes with the individual report for every single crash on a specific device. Here we have some crashes coming from an iPhone X. And we actually have one of the most exciting features that I really like is, once again, talking about that integration of stuff, we can actually see the events. And so we have this feature, it's sometimes called breadcrumbs or custom events, but because we instrumented actions in this event, we can now drill into this specific crash that happened at this specific phone at this specific time, and actually see that the occurrence was 10/29 on this date.
Wow.
And you can see as the events, the history of the events as they were going through.
That led to the crash.
And so you can see here's the session start. The application actually started up. You can see that they did the sign up initiate. They completed the sign up step. They actually got to the see room state. They actually initiated the booking of the room. And then right after they did that, the app crashed just a few seconds later. And so being able to see that history of a crash, not just the stack trace, which tells you the execution thread, which may just be a second or like less of history that you have to work on. This actually tells you the steps that the user was going through, the behaviors that they did that led up to that crash. And I think you can get a lot of insight into what's triggering a crash when you actually take a look at what was the user doing when they got to this crash.
Interesting. Very, very cool.
So a pretty cool feature there. Once again, showing off that instead of having the individual kind of isolated data in the individual tools, having them pulled together into one tool can be really
Yeah,
powerful.
I love the left nav because you're pulling together crashes, you're pulling together distribution and test. That's where those are three different UIs that have to go jump between. And we haven't even talked about, one of my favorite features was the build, right? Because setting up your own build agent, another reason that the builds are so popular that we have agents now is because setting one up is a nightmare, right? I mean, getting the right Xcode, getting the right Xamarin tools, getting the right Android Studio and getting the right Android SDKs. I mean, it was just a nightmare. And every time I'd dust off my demo, I'd be cursing for hours, right? As I went to update my Mac. And now it's like so cool that we have that. And the reason that we have that is we basically had it in App Center first. And the build was so simple. Just give me your cert, give me your provisioning profile, give me your repo. All right, we got you now, right? We're going to take care of this for you.
I think the thing that I like to show off for the build is that you talk about that tool chain and updating. This changes your tool chain update to just a text box.
Yeah, that's
so you just
unbelievable.
have a drop-down box, pick which Xcode version you want, pick which tool chain version you want, which mono version, which Xcode version do you want, and then you can go ahead and do other deployment.
That's awesome.
No need to deploy packages or do an update. No need to like log into your build
Sure.
machine and remember your credentials.
And a lot of people don't realize is that, yes, this is an awesome, cool new UI, but this is still using VSTS in the back end. VSTS is the muscle that drives all the power that's happening here. And again, this is just awesome because the demo, I'm glad you liked People Tracker. It took a long time to develop that.
Yeah.
Right, and what App Center is doing, what VSTS is doing, is they're making that demo not something that you have to be a Donovan to produce. It's a demo that not even a demo, it's like you can now do this for real, and you can do it easily inside of it, which is awesome. So that's awesome, Tour. What we need to do now is just get to some of the questions. So the first question that we got was from John. He says, are the tasks under the different agent phases executed sequentially or in parallel? Today they are actually, that is a great question. They are actually run sequentially, so it's first stage, second stage, and then and then the third phase. The actual underlying infrastructure, the framework on which it's built on, can be run in parallel. And in the YAML version, because we actually can do it graphically, and we also have a YAML version coming, I believe we did announce that yesterday, you can actually say run these phases in parallel. And what we're going to have to do is basically update the UI to be able to allow you to make that same configuration. So the answer is kind of like yes and no. From the UI, you can't configure it to run parallel, so they will run sequentially. If you switch to our YAML build, which I think might still be in private preview, I'd have to go back and double check, you can actually run your phases in parallel. Another opportunity is just to go inside of release management, set these up as environments. Those environments can definitely be run in parallel. The other question was about DAC packs. Our DAC packs are only used for the schema diffs, right? So what about database basic data like metadata that has to be in there, types and statuses and things like that? Well, you have a couple options there. But your statement is correct. The DAC pack that is produced is like the digital fingerprint of your schema. It knows what every object in your database is supposed to look like. You basically take the DAC pack file, you give it to our task, and you point it at a database, and it figures out what needs to be changed. But you're saying, but yeah, we have metadata in there. You can actually run post or pre-SQL scripts that you can actually package as part of your database project. Now, those need to be idempotent, which means you need to be able to write your script in such a way that it knows if or it does not need to be run, right? You maybe do a quick query that, hey, is there 19 rows in there? It's supposed to be 20, or I need to go look at certain values in my database. Now I know I need to go run this, right? So the scripts that you write need to be pretty intelligent, but yes, you can actually move data as well. It just becomes a little bit more effort on your part to make sure you write your scripts in such the right way. Can you use the Mac build agents with on-premise TFS and VSTS? If not, will this soon be? The answer is yes, and I'll tell you why. Because since VSTS, as far back as I can remember, not only can you pull code from VSTS Get in TFVC or Bitbucket or Git or GitHub, you can actually pull from a TFS server as well. So your source code does not have to be in VSTS for you to actually build with VSTS. You can say, I want to pull my code for my VSTS build from a TFS that sits on someone's actual network behind their firewall. So if you configure that to say, I want my source to come from TFS, then you can still use all the hosted pools that we have inside of VSTS, right? So I would challenge you and say, if you're using VSTS for your builds, why don't we just put your source code up there and then have the best of both worlds? I'm sure you have a lot of excuses or reasons why you can't do that. Just make sure that they're legitimate, and if you can, just move to VSTS, guys. It's freaking awesome. I would like to see, okay, this is a question for you. I would like to see how App Center integrates with VSTS to auto-create bugs. What is the process for that?
Yeah, so we do have integrations for VSTS and some other common tools built into App Center. So it's very easy. You just kind of set it up, and then you can basically auto-create the bug based upon a crash report through a manual process. Okay,
hold on. There was one other question. Is there any way we could go back? 'Cause I think we missed one question that I know I knew the answer to, but now I can't remember the question. But there was 3 questions ahead of time. Blah, blah, blah. Can't remember. So go ahead and answer that last question, because I think it's another mobile.
Yeah, so your question is around, looks like a question about your backend and your mobile app need to be in the same solution or Azure project. And if not, do I need to make a CI? I think the answer is no, right? Like the flexibility of the tasks in VSTS can point to different solution structure within your repository.
Absolutely. Not only that, you can actually, inside of your build, you could actually even clone other repositories, right? So if you needed to. So they don't even have to be in the same, not only do they not have to be in the same solution, they technically don't even have to be in the same repository.
Yeah, you see the mix and match.
The way that I do it is I actually have one repo with 3 different solutions all in that same repo, right? So I have one for my Windows, obviously. I have one that's going to do all my .NET Core, which is going to be built on Linux, and then I have a mobile solution. So if you were to look at the root of if you clone my repo, when you look at the root, you see 3 SLN files there. One for mobile, one for my middle tier, and one for my front end that's for Linux. It's being .NET Core. And then in each phase, I basically have the build task point directly to the SLN that I want it to actually work on. So you can actually do that as well. So they don't have to be in the same solution. They can be in different areas and even different repositories if you need to, sub-modules, however you want to go back in there and get that data. Would I like to see how App Center integrates with VSTS? Oh yeah, we did that one already. No, there was one before that one, Golnaz. There was a question, one of the first 3, and I can't remember the last question, which was actually a good one. So if I did not answer your question, I am at Donovan Brown on Twitter. Ask me the question again because I knew the answer, I just can't remember the question.
Yeah, that's right.
But it was a good question. I was like, oh, I want to answer that question. So please, if I did not answer your question or you get any questions after we're done off the air here in just a couple minutes, please feel free to go ahead and ask your question again to me directly on Twitter. And I'm sure, Josh, you're on Twitter too, I believe.
Yeah, Joshua Weber, MSFT.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I have kind of a popular name. So.
Yes, you do. So you had to put the Microsoft at the end.
Need a little extra tag.
Yeah, my name is getting more popular, which I hate. I liked when it was unique, but luckily I was fast on Twitter, so I got Donovan Brown.
There you go.
So you can actually find me at donovanbrown.com. I mean, actually, you can. donovanbrown.com, Donovan Brown on Twitter. Pretty much Donovan Brown everywhere. So great.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you very much.
Shoot me all your questions, and if I don't know the answer, I'll probably add Josh or James or someone else here at Microsoft that knows the answer for you onto our Twitter. Please enjoy the rest of Connect, and I actually will see some of you again, I think, in a couple of hours. I have another session where we're going to do DevOps for any language and any platform, and you're going to see the newest member of the league, Jessica Dean, is going to be demoing for me. I'm very excited about that, and she's going to show you how we can do all this cool stuff on Linux as well. Thank you so much, guys.
Excellent.